Good afternoon, everyone. And we're ready to begin our weekly Torah portion, which is Beshalach in the Art Scroll Chumash. It's on page 366. So the Jewish people are finally going free from Egypt in this week's Torah portion. And the highlight of this week's Torah portion is actually recited each and every day in our prayers. And that is the Az Yashir, the song of praise that the Jewish people sang to the Jewish people after crossing the Red Sea and watching their Egyptian oppressors and tormentors drowned in the sea. And they break out in spontaneous song known as Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea. And every day in our morning prayers, we recite the entire Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea, known as the Az Yashir. And incidentally, this is the first time the Jewish people break out in song, even though they had 10 plagues and they already left Egypt. But as long as there was the potential of the Egyptians still pursuing them, they may have been physically out of the confines of Egypt. They may have been physically outside of the city limits. They left the country, but they still internally lived with the fear of the Egyptians. It was only when they saw their Egyptians, taskmasters, drowned in the sea, that they had the sense of relief now that they knew that the Egyptians will no longer persecute them, and therefore they now broke out in the song of Az Yashir. But before we get to the highlight, so to speak, of this week's Torah portion, which is the Song of the Sea that's recited each and every day, but especially the Shabbat, there are only 2 readings a year, that the custom is that the entire congregation rises to their feet when it's sung. One is the 10 Commandments. We all rise to hear the 10 Commandments when it's read in the synagogue. And this Shabbat, when it comes to Az Yashir in synagogues around the world, the entire congregation will rise to hear the Song of the Sea, and we will chant along and envision or imagine ourselves standing at the sea, joining in the jubilation and the joy of the Jews as they sang this joyous song of relief, of thanksgiving to God for their salvation. And a matter of fact, this Shabbat has a special name given to it. It's referred to as Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of song. Every Shabbat is filled with song. Every Shabbat table is filled with song. Every Shabbat service is filled with song. But there's one Shabbat that's called the Shabbat of song, and that is this Shabbat. And there are many customs associated with Shabbat Shirah, of course, to do more singing and to celebrate Jewish music and song, but also there's a beautiful custom that you can try observing if you like. Before Shabbat, put out some seeds or bread for the birds. Why? Because it says that when the Jewish people sang the Song of the Sea, the birds sang with them. The birds joined in chirping their Song of the Sea with them. So as an expression of appreciation for the birds who sang along with the Jewish people, there's a custom to put out bird seeds. And I know children many times in Jewish day schools will come home with a little bird's feeder to hang outside the window to give the birds special food in honor of Shirat Hayam that we're going to sing this Shabbat. But the opening verse of the passage says, Vayehi Beshalach Paro, and Paro sent the nation out. As you know, after the plague of the killing of the firstborn, Paro came running to Moses and Aaron and said, leave quickly, I don't want to suffer anymore. And so now the Jewish people are leaving Egypt. And what does the verse say? It says, God took the Jewish people through a more circuitous route, not the direct route, which would have been through the land of the Philistines, because God was afraid that the nation may regret or reconsider going free when they would encounter war. If the Egyptians would confront the Jews in battle saying, you can't pass through our land, the Jews would reconsider their exodus and return to Egypt. So God took them in a roundabout way, not to have to go through the land of the Philistines. And here we have this idea, they say in the Talmud there's a beautiful concept called the long short road and the short long road. You may have heard these terms, but it's actually based on a Talmudic story. There was a Rabbi Yeshua, who said he once asked a child in Jerusalem, how do you get to this and this city? And the child said to him, do you want the long short route or the short long route? And he said, what do you mean? So he said that I want, of course, the long route. I want the shortest possible route. So he gave him the route, which was very short to get to this town. But when he got there, he saw that there were orchards and vineyards that were blocking the path to get into the city. And now he understood what the child meant. The short road ends up being the long road, because now you got there, but you have to go all the way around to get to where you need to go, as opposed to the long short road, which it takes a little longer to get there, but once you get there, you've arrived. And this is what happened with God. God said, I could take the Jews on the short road out of Egypt to the land of Israel, but then it's going to be the long road, because they're going to go back to Egypt when they encounter battle, because they may be physically free, but as we know, the Jews still lack the courage to fight their battles. They had to regain their self-worth and self-esteem and confidence, and therefore they were still in a state of fear, and therefore they would surrender at the first challenge that they were confronted with. So therefore God said, I'm going to take the long short route. It's a little longer around the Philistines' land, but eventually it'll get them where they need to go. And this, of course, is a very applicable in all of our lives, that sometimes we look for the shortest way to get somewhere. We want quick, instantaneous results. They say in today's day and age, kids stand in front of the microwave and, it takes about a minute to warm up the food. And they're like, come on, quick. I don't have any time. What's taking so long? Today, we don't know how to wait for things, because we're used to having everything by the click of a button instantaneously. In the olden days, people knew that things take time. You have to work to achieve certain things. You can't just throw your clothing in the washing machine and press, power on and come back an hour later and it's all washed. You have to go down to the well and wash it and clean it. Everything took more time. Today, everything's very quick. You used to have letters, then you have fax machines, then you had emails. Now it's instant messaging, texting, everything very, very fast. But in life, some things take time. And if you take the quick route, you find out that the quick route is really the long route. And the long route turns out to be the shortest route. And this is what God was teaching the Jewish people, that there was a long journey to get to where they needed to go. And it took a little longer, but that was the only route that would ultimately succeed. So God takes them in a roundabout way. Now, when the Jews were leaving Egypt, it says that Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, because the Jewish people had promised Joseph that they would take his remains to be buried in the land of Israel. So Joseph is carrying the casket of Moses is carrying the casket of Joseph for eventual burial in the land of Israel. And we're told that at the sea actually split in the merit of Joseph, because he was such a righteous individual. Now, of course, we know what happens. As soon as the Jews leave, Paro has a change of heart, and he decides to pursue the Jews, and the Jews come to the sea, and they panic, and they cry out to Moses, and they say, why did you bring us into the desert just to die here in the wilderness? Better we should die in Egypt. Why did we have to die out here in the wilderness? And they actually say the following very sarcastic line to Moses. They say, was there a shortage of graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the desert? Now imagine, after 10 plagues and all these miracles, they still questioned and doubted Moses's ability to perform miracles for them. And they went into their natural state of fear and insecurity. And this is where Moses says, stand still, don't do a thing. God, you'll see the salvation of God. And of course, God tells Moses, tell the Jewish people to journey on. And we all know the famous midrash that Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into the sea split, Moses stretched out his arm with his staff, the sea split, the Jews walk through, the Egyptians follow in hot pursuit. The sea closes up on them, drowns them, and when the Jews see the chariots and the riders and the horsemen of Egypt all being drowned, they break out into a song of the sea. And this is the story. So here we have 3 episodes that I want to sort of analyze. The opening story was God taking the Jews in a roundabout way, not to have to confront the Philistines in battle, because they would reconsider their exodus and revert and return back to Egypt. That's episode number 1. The second major episode, of course, is when the Jews come to the sea. And the Egyptians are following them, chasing after them. They see the sea in front of them, the Egyptians behind them. They're sandwiched in the middle, and they cry out to Moses and say, "Are there not enough graves in Egypt? What did you do? Why did you take us out of Egypt? We're just going to die now. We're going to get killed." They lose all faith. And what does Moses say to God, to the Jews? Stand still. Everything's going to be great. God's going to perform miracles. Stretches out his hand over the sea splits. They walk through, and then the Egyptians follow them and get drowned in the sea. That's the second episode. But then at the end of this week's parsha, the Jews are in the desert, and there's a third episode. The third episode is that the first nation to attack the Jews after the Jews left Egypt was Amalek. Until this day, we remember Amalek, to blot out the memory of Amalek, because they were the first nation who had the audacity, the gall, to come and attack a fledgling Jewish nation that just emerged from slavery. Imagine Jews who just left the concentration camps. They left emaciated, like skeletons. And imagine some evil regime would try to annihilate them at that point. It would be the height of cruelty and evil. Well, the Jews were enslaved for decades, 86 years of slavery. And now they finally go out free. And the first nation that went out to attack the Jews, to wipe them out, the first anti-Semitic attack, you could say, against the newly born Jewish nation was Amalek. And all the descendants of Amalek are all these nations throughout history that have tried to destroy the Jewish people. And what happens when Amalek attacks the Jews? So the end passage of this week's Torah portion says that Amalek came to attack the Jewish people, and Moses says to Joshua, his disciple, "Go choose men to go wage battle against Amalek." And that's what Yeshua does. He gathers people to go fight Amalek. And what does Moses do? Moses goes up on top of the mountain, and he takes with him Aaron, his brother, and Hur, which was his nephew. And the verse says that they go up onto the mountain, and the Jews are fighting in the plain against Amalek, battling. And Moses lifts up his hands to the heavens in a sign of victory. And at one point, the verse says that Moses' hands become weary, and he wants to lower his hands because the battle's going on all day. And Aaron and Hur support his hands up in the air. So here you have 3 episodes: the opening, the middle, and the end of the Torah portion. The opening one is God avoids conflict by taking the Jews in a roundabout route. Second occasion, the splitting of the sea, God says, "I'll fight your battles for you." And God splits the sea and drowns the Egyptians. In the final episode, what happens? The Jews have to go fight the Amaleks, but Moses stands on the mountain with his hands lifted towards the heavens. And our rabbis say, why did Moses lift his hands? Was it the Jews battling Amalek that made them victorious over Amalek because they defeated Amalek? Or was it Moses' hands in the air? And our rabbis say it was a combination. Moses' hand in the air caused the Jews to look up to heaven, which was a sign that the salvation will come from God. And this caused the Jews who were battling to put their faith in God and to pray to God, which allowed them to be victorious. But here you see the story of the rehabilitation of the Jewish people. We all know the Jews had to wander 40 years in the desert because ultimately they never developed the free mindset. You could take the Jew out of Egypt, but it's much more difficult to take Egypt out of the Jew. But in these 3 episodes, you see how the first story, God takes them in a roundabout way to avoid confronting the Philistines. In the second incident, God says, "I'll wage your battles for you." In the third incident, God says, now you have to muster the courage to fight for yourself. I'll help you, but you have to fight. And here you see the progress that the Jewish people are making. That in the early stages, God says they can't even confront battle because they'll fear and they'll go back to Egypt. In the second instance, God says, okay, I'm going to let you have the fear of the attack, but I'm going to show you that I could intervene and save you and perform miracles for you. But at some point, God says, now the Jewish people have to learn to fight their own battles. That you have to be willing to stand up for yourself, because ultimately becoming a free person means that you're not always going to be dependent and reliant on others to fight your battles for you, to stand up for you. And of course, the simplest analogy is children. When you have a child, when they're young and they have a problem in school, the parent goes down to the school, speaks to the teacher, speaks to the kids, intervenes, saves the child. But at a certain stage in life, you tell your children, you got to work things out. I'll support you. I'll help you. But ultimately, you can't rely on your parents your whole life to resolve your problems and your conflicts. Your parents are there to give you moral support. They're there to give you encouragement. They're there to empower you. They're there to guide you. But if you don't learn to stand up for yourself, you will always be weak and dependent. You have to learn to stand on your own 2 feet and learn to have the moral courage to fight for yourself. And this is really the story of every person and the story of the Jewish people as well. And it's interesting the role that Moses plays, because Moses is like that parent who loves the Jewish people. When it came to the splitting of the sea, he did it for them. God, he stretched out his arm and the sea split. Now Moses says, I will support you, but you have to fight yourself. And how does he support them? By giving them a sign of victory and pointing their eyes upward, heavenward to God. Now, here we understand the idea of leadership. What is leadership? Leadership, of course, is not doing things for others. Leadership is empowering and inspiring others to do it for themselves. You have to be the source of empowerment. You have to be the source of inspiration. But ultimately, the people you're leading have to be willing to do the job and take on the responsibility to achieve the goals. You're there to strengthen them, to guide them, to empower, but not to do it on their behalf. And that doesn't matter whether it's the leadership of parents, leadership of educators, or leadership of community people. Every leader's job is to inspire and empower others. And perhaps most significantly is that Moses, standing with his arms in the air, showing them a sign of victory, was communicating a message of strength and a morale booster, saying, have confidence, we're going to win. And maybe that's the most important job of a leader. What's amazing is that Moses' hands in the air is a non-verbal communication. It's just hands in the air. And what the Torah is perhaps teaching us is that sometimes the power of a leader is not even in what they say, of course, in what the leader says, but sometimes it's what the leader does and the example they show. And of course, this applies mostly to parents or leaders of their children, that there's a concept called mirroring, right? We mirror each other's emotions. And when we mirror positive emotions to our children or to anyone we're leading, they then receive that positive emotion, and it empowers them and inspires them. So when the leader shows a sign of confidence and optimism, the followers look and they feel empowered by the optimism and the confidence and the morale of the leader. But when the leader shows doubt and weakness and fear and insecurity, then he mirrors those emotions. And so not only doesn't the leader have to use verbal communication, even Moses' raising his hand was a hand gesture. And when he got weary, Aaron and Hur had to hold up his hands, because if he shows his weariness, if he shows he's getting fatigued and tired, that will cause the Jews who are fighting the battle to feel fatigued and tired. So he has to maintain that spirit of optimism, faith, strength, confidence. And then the Jews will mirror that same emotion. And the truth is, every human being is a leader, because we all have our environment, our surroundings. And that's why, it says, or Nachman of Breslau said, that our face is public property, because everyone has to look at it. And therefore we have to smile when we see others. Because if we radiate a face of joy, then we will mirror that in others. Others will feel joyous. If we look down, farbissen, others will feel that negative emotion and will mirror that. As they say, smile and the world will smile with you. And so a big part of leadership is showing that sign and that being that symbol of faith, of confidence, of trust in God. And of course, prayer, looking towards God, looking up. As they say that, it's like the fly in the jar, right? The fly is running around the jar and keeps on hitting his head against the glass until he collapses and dies. You have to show the fly the way out of the jar by looking upward, not just going back and forth. Sometimes we're running back and forth in life and we're hitting our heads against the wall and we're getting exhausted of life. And the leader's job is to raise our eyes up to heaven, like Moses has raised the eyes up of the Jews to heaven and say, look beyond the physical, look beyond the limitations of life, look towards heaven and boost the morale of the Jewish people. And that's why the Jewish people were given the power and the encouragement of Moses to win this battle. And indeed, they are victorious and they defeat Amalek. One other interesting idea is, why is it that at the splitting of the sea, the Jewish people go into a state of panic? And they say, were there not enough graves to go back to that you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Why couldn't we just have died back there? And they actually want to go back to Egypt. And they're so overcome with fear that they're ready to surrender. They're ready to wave the white flag. And Moses has to say, don't fear, everything's going to work out. And he leads them across the sea. But when it comes to the battle of Amalek, when the Jews come to Moses and say, Amalek is attacking us. And Moses says, okay, Joshua, go get men and go fight. And I'll be on the mountaintop. The Jews actually pick up their ammunition, and they did leave Egypt with ammunition. It's the opening verse that says, Parshat Beshalach, the Jews went out armed because they knew they may encounter battle. So they did have the wherewithal to defend themselves. That's in the opening verses. But when it came to Amalek, they were told, okay, go take that ammunition and go fight the Amalekites. And there the Jews listen. They don't say, we're afraid, we surrender. They actually have the courage to fight. And the question is, what happened? At the sea, they were ready to go back. They said, why did you take us out of Egypt, Moses? But here they don't say to Moses, why did you take us out to die at the hands of the Amaleks? They actually are ready to fight. What changed between the splitting of the sea and the war against Amalek? And you could say, well, after they saw the splitting of the sea and the great miracles that God performed, then it gave them more faith. But that shouldn't be enough, because they saw the 10 plagues before that, and that didn't strengthen them to the point to fight the Egyptians. And why then did God say, okay, go fight? God said, don't fight the Egyptians, just cross through the sea. And here, God says, no, you have to fight the Amalekites. And one interesting answer is that we all know the expression, the point of no return. Sometimes we struggle with a decision. We debate something in our minds, whether or not we should do something or not. And we go back and forth. And the doubt itself is what paralyzes us with fear or concern. There was a great Spanish commander, Cortés, who, when he was conquering Mexico, he burnt the ships that his soldiers came across with, so that they have no way of fleeing, of going back. And sometimes when there's no alternative, there's no way back, you fight like you've never fought before, because there's no way to reverse track. There's no way to return to your former position. And therefore, you have no choice. You can't go back, so you could only go forward. I often think of the Jewish people after the Holocaust and establishing the state of Israel. And you say, how did Israel win so many wars, 1948 and 57 and 63 and 68, 73? All these wars, Six-Day War, Yom Kippur War of Independence. How did they do that? Tiny little nation against all these mighty Arab nations. And of course, they looked up to heaven, like Moses holding his hands in the air. They had divine assistance. It was miraculous. But also the Jews knew there's nowhere to go. If we don't fight and win, what are we going to do? Go back to Europe, go back to the concentration camps and the hell we experienced? When you have that kind of motivation that you know there's no alternative, then you find the strength and the courage to prevail, and you do prevail. Because you know there's no looking back, there's only going forward in life. But sometimes when we have the alternative of just going back, backtracking, we take the easy escape route. And there are many commentaries that talk about the story of Jacob when the angel attacked him, and he wrestled with the angel all night, and we were given the name Yisroel. And they say, who was this angel of Esav that God sent to attack Jacob? That God knew that Jacob was about to meet his brother Esav the next day and have to confront him. And he was afraid that Jacob was trying to escape. And therefore God cut off his escape route, like Cortez burning the ships, that they can't go back and they have no alternative but to fight. And so sometimes at the sea, the Jews were like, okay, maybe we should just go back to Egypt and be slaves again. You know, it's better than dying. We'll just surrender. And we would accept the slavery. But at this point, they had already crossed the sea. There was no going back to Egypt. So they had one choice: either fight the Amalekites and persevere and prevail, or die. And so when there's no other alternative, there's no other choice, then obviously they had to fight and be victorious. And that is perhaps why only at the war of Amalek did the Jews pick up arms and actually fight for their victory. Talk about the splitting of the sea. There's something very interesting in the way the Torah describes the splitting of the sea. On the one hand, the splitting of the sea is perhaps the greatest miracle ever. Many times when the Talmud talks about a great miracle that's very difficult, it says as difficult as the splitting of the sea. But when you look at the way the Torah describes it, interestingly, the Torah describes it in a natural phenomenon. So I'm just going to read the verses that says the following. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Hashem moved the sea with a strong east wind all the night, and he turned the sea to damp land, and the water split. The children of Israel came within the sea on dry land, and the water was a wall from them on the right and on the left. Egypt pursued and came after them, every horse of Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen into the midst of the sea. And sure enough, what did God do? He then closes up the sea and drowns them. So here we're talking about the greatest miracle. The sea splits, forms two walls of water, and the Jews walk through in the middle. And then the Egyptians follow and get drowned. But yet when the Torah describes it, the Torah says that Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and Hashem moved the sea with a strong east wind all night long. In other words, the Torah explains it like a tsunami, like a natural occurrence, that there happened to be a wind that God brought, and the wind pushed the water. Like, why do we need to know the natural occurrence that brought about the splitting of the sea? This was a supernatural event. Why talk about this east wind? And one answer, obviously, is that God is showing us that even nature is miraculous, obviously. So if you want to attribute it to the east wind, there happened to be a tsunami and the land dried up. And as soon as the Jews crossed over, the tsunami was over and the waters came gushing back and drowned the Egyptians. Well, sometimes in life, something happens in a natural way, but you have to ask yourself the timing of it. Just when the Jews came to the sea, that's when the tsunami occurred, and that's when it closed up. So God will often use natural circumstances to bring about supernatural events. But you have to be able to perceive that even though there may be a rational, natural explanation to what happened, and I know many scientists offer rational explanations to the story of the splitting of the sea, the fact that it happened precisely when the Jews reached the sea and ended precisely when the Egyptians entered into the sea, that in itself is something supernatural, something miraculous, and therefore a cause for great song and jubilation of thanks to God for performing that miracle. But also, what's fascinating about the splitting of the sea, and I used this analogy this week once, was that, the Sfas Emes tells the story about a an artist who made a sculpture of a horse. And the sculpture was so precise, so true to form that it looked like a real horse. It was an amazing sculpture. And he put it in the middle of the city square for people to admire. But to his amazement, people were just walking by it. People weren't even stopping to look at it or to appreciate it or to admire it. And he said to his friend, they don't understand. I mean, it's such a beautiful sculpture of a horse. Why is no one stopping to gaze at it? And the friend said, you know what the problem is? The problem is that it's so real looking that people just think it's a horse standing in the middle of the city square, so they don't stop to admire it. He said, what I recommend you do is cut the sculpture in half and put half of the horse on one side of the street and half on the other side. And then people will say, wow, look at that real horse in two parts. And they'll stop to admire and wonder about it in amazement and wonderment. So too, says the Sfas Emes, when you go to the sea and you see the magnificent sea, you think it's beautiful, it's magnificent, but you say, I'm looking at the greatest miracle. No, you don't think of it as a miracle. You think of it as nature. But when the sea splits, like the horse in two parts, then you're like, whoa, a miracle. So if you went to the beach and the ocean had a path right in the middle with two walls of water, you would say, I witnessed the greatest miracle, like the splitting of the sea, and you would break out in song and praise to God. But if the sea is rushing in its normal, natural course, then you take it for granted. You don't see a miracle. Like the splitting of that horse, that makes people realize. So too, God had to split the sea to make them realize. But really, with the east wind blowing, God's saying is, it's really all me. It doesn't matter if it's nature or not. You could look at the greatest miracle in nature and think it's just nature. But really, there's nothing natural about it. It's all miraculous. And therefore, the challenge of the splitting of the sea is to see the splitting of the sea in every aspect of life, to realize that everything we witness, everything we observe in this world is really, truly all miraculous. Now, there's also a spiritual message of the splitting of the sea. When you look at the sea, you just see the water on the surface. You don't see what lies beneath the surface. But there's a whole universe of sea life, of oceania, of all forms of life living beneath the sea. So too, when we look at ourselves, we often see what's on the surface, who we are on the surface. But when we split our sea, when we part our sea, we see what lies beneath the surface, which is our true potential, our infinite spiritual potential of our soul. And the splitting of the sea is a prelude to the song of praise to God. Because when a person is able to split their own sea and reveal strengths and talents and abilities and skills and powers that they themselves were not aware of, and they discover a whole world that lies beneath the surface, that is the source of greatest joy. And that's what the significance spiritually of the splitting of the sea is, that it's not enough to leave Egypt. You know, often people want to get out of an oppressive situation. And of course, that's step one in the process, to get out of Egypt, whatever Egypt represents for you. But just fleeing negative circumstances is not the ultimate goal of life. The ultimate goal of life is that after you've fled those oppressive circumstances, now you have to split your sea and reveal all the potential for positivity that you have. And that's why after they left Egypt, they experienced the splitting of the sea. And then the next step is the revelation at Mount Sinai, which is where they received the Torah, which is the instructions of how to develop our subconscious spiritual potential, that which we cannot visibly see, but only the Torah could help us accentuate and develop and draw forth. Just like when you look at the soil of the earth, you don't see on the surface everything it's capable of producing. But when you plant those seeds beneath the surface of the soil, suddenly it starts to grow magnificent fruits and trees. And by the way, tomorrow night is Tu B'Shvat, which is the day we celebrate the New Year's of trees, which again, you look at the soil of the earth, you don't see that, but suddenly you see trees with orchards and fruits and vegetables and everything, and wheat, everything comes from the earth. Or think about all the diamonds and the minerals that lie beneath the surface. If you just look at the surface, you see dirt. But underneath that, there's wells of water and minerals and diamonds and the capability to produce fruit, which is Tu B'Shvat, and trees. And you have to split the seed to reveal that. And that is what the message is, that now that the Jews went free, they can't just perceive themselves as ex-fugitives or slaves. They have to realize who they really are and what they're capable of based on their inner true self. Now, one of the first commandments the Jewish people get right after they split the sea and they come through and they sing a song of praise to God, they're given a very first mitzvah. You know, when they get to Mount Sinai, they get the Torah and they get the 10 Commandments. Now, we all know that the fourth commandment is remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy. But actually, even before they get to Mount Sinai, which is next week's Torah portion, and they get the 10 Commandments, which commandment number 4 is the commandment of Shabbat, in this week's Torah portion, and you can find this on chapter 16, verses 4 to 10, we read about the Jews complaining to God that they don't have food in the desert. And God says, fine, every day I'm going to send manna from heaven. Now, the term manna from heaven it's a gift from God. And by the way, every time you sing the Birkat HaMazon, the first section of Birkat HaMazon was composed by Moses as gratitude for the manna from heaven. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hazan et haolam. And you may say, why thank God with the formula that Moses composed to thank God for the manna? We don't get manna from heaven. We have to, by the sweat of our brow, we have to toil the earth and plant and produce and work hard for a living. And the answer is that even when our food comes through our own toil, like the farmer or the worker, we know it's manna from heaven. It's all a gift from God. You know, people use the term, oh, it's manna from heaven. Manna from heaven is something I didn't work for, I didn't appreciate, I didn't expect. It just came. It was like manna from heaven. And every day there are times we experience things that we didn't work for it. It just came our way like a blessing, manna from heaven. It's manna from heaven. The first lesson, obviously, is when God gives you manna from heaven, say thank you, appreciate it. Don't take it for granted. Recognize the source of the manna from heaven. It's from God. And if God gave it to you, you have to utilize it properly. But furthermore, even when you did work for something, it's also manna from heaven, because a lot of people work hard and they don't succeed. The fact that you succeeded and your toil bear fruit, that is manna from heaven too, because what's the rationale? You put some seeds in the ground and fruit grows out. That's clearly a blessing from God. So same thing with the work. I went to work, I put effort in, and every person has to put effort into earning a living. You can't expect it to come naturally without any effort. God wants us to make the vessel, and there's an appropriate amount of effort we have to put in. You know, we have to do enough for God to send the blessing, but not overstrain ourselves, because God wants us to do other things, which is have time for spirituality, for Torah study, for good deeds, for family, for community. So you have to work a certain amount to make a vessel. Now God will send a blessing. There's something called hishtadlut, a proper effort. How do you know how much is the proper effort and how much is excessive? So the Vilna Gaon once gave an analogy. He says, when you knock a nail in the wall, it's effort. You're knocking the nail in the wall. But sometimes you hit an obstacle, and now you're knocking, and the nail starts bending. He says, then you know you've gone too far. You're wasting your time. Same thing, he says, when things start getting crooked, meaning I have to come up with all these crooked ways of doing things because it's not going in the natural way. Now you know you're overdoing it. So the natural course, yes, we have to make a vessel. But once you make that vessel, it's God who sends the blessing. And therefore, even when we eat by the sweat of our brow, we do Birkat HaMazon in the same formula that Moses composed for manna from heaven, because we know that all of our food, all of our blessings, all of our livelihood is all a blessing of manna from heaven. But God says, 1 minute, the seventh day I want you to rest. It's a day of Shabbat. And therefore on Friday, I'm going to give a double blessing, a double portion of manna a double portion of manna will fall from heaven on Friday. And until this very day, on Friday, we have 2 loaves of bread called Lechem Mishnah. Why 2 chalot under the cover when we make Kiddush? To symbolize the double portion of bread that fell on Friday. And the message till today is that you don't have to work on Shabbat. God will give you a double blessing on Friday, meaning you could earn the same amount by working 6 days as working 7 days. So why would you work 7 days? So the laws of Shabbat are given right here. One of the first laws after the Jews crossed the sea and sing the song of Az Yashir, they're given the instructions of not collecting food on Shabbat. God will give a double portion on Friday. And the obvious reason why this is the first commandment is because they just came out of slavery. And so the first thing to know is you're free. You're no longer slaves. A slave works 7 days a week. A human being doesn't have to work 7 days a week. And one of the greatest gifts that the Jews gave the world is the idea of Shabbat. Whether Christians do it on Sunday or we do it on Shabbat, they took this concept of a day of rest from us. So when you look at months and years, that's something that we find a natural occurrence. The orbit of the moon every month, or the sun every year, 365 days. That's natural cycles. There's nothing natural about a week. Nothing changes in nature. 24 hours, sunrise, sunset, days, months, years, those are all natural phenomena that gave us days, months, and years. But where did we get weeks from? There's only one source for week, and that is God said, 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. And that's why every calendar has weeks in it. It's from the Torah. It's the idea of resting on the seventh day. And we all know what the famous Echad Ha'am once said, more than the Jewish people kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. And we've said this many times, but never has Shabbat been a more precious commodity than today. The wisdom and the gift of Shabbat is in this week's Torah portion 3,300 years ago. But as we become a more digital and technological community and world, and we're now on our phones or on our computers literally 24/7, if you have the gift of Shabbat, at least you get 24, 25 hours of rest. And if you have not kept Shabbat, try it once, and you'll see that it's the greatest gift you can give yourself and you can give your family. Because for 25 hours, there's a term called renewable energy. We're into renewable energy today because we realize that's the way we sustain the world. Well, just like the world needs renewable energy, we human beings need renewable energy. And if we're spending our energy 24/7, running, going, doing, when do we renew our own energy? When do we focus on ourselves and our families? And the reason maybe why the Jewish people have been around for 3,300 years is because we have sustainable, renewable energy. Every Shabbat, Jews around the world stop at sundown on Friday night, and for 5 hours, they renew themselves. They renew themselves by spending time with their family, with their loved ones, with themselves, studying, reading, learning, singing, eating, celebrating life, talking to their spouses, talking to their children, talking to their parents, going to shul, being with friends, being with community, inspiring ourselves, giving ourselves energy to get through the next week. And that is the key. That's why Echad Ha'am famously said, more than Jewish people kept Shabbat, Shabbat kept the Jewish people. And so the first gift is you're not a slave and you're not a machine and you can't work 7 days a week. You need to take a day off. And in the olden days, at least when you left the office at 5 o'clock, you didn't have anything to do work-wise till 9 o'clock the next morning. But today people reach you on your computer, on your phone, 24/7, and people don't stop working from the time they get up in the morning till the time they go to sleep. They're on their phones responding to texts and work questions and emails, and there's no boundaries anymore. And work invades everything, and this constant stress about a million different things. At least when you close your phone, and you close your computers, and you close your television for 25 hours, you don't have to hear all the bad news. You don't have to listen to all the fighting of the politicians and society. You don't have to listen to, other things that are distressing. You could literally focus on what's really important and not have to deal with work-related things. And people know it's Shabbat. I don't answer my phone. I don't answer emails. And today, people expect you to respond. If you get an email and you don't respond, it's like it's been already 5 hours. Why didn't you respond to my email or my text? I expect you to respond in 5 minutes, as though I'm waiting for your text. And there's this pressure to deal with everything immediately. But if people know you're observant, they're like, well, of course, he's not going to answer his. I have many people who, right after Shabbat, they text me and they say, Rabbi, I was waiting for Shabbat to be over to text you. It's a beautiful thing. They know that Shabbat, there's no point of texting. No, don't try it. I'm not going to pick up. So they wait. And that's good to have designated time to spend with your family, to bond, quality time. and not just quality time, but quantity time, 25 hours of uninterrupted time. And you could sit at the Shabbat dinner table, which is, people talk about Thanksgiving. Oh, they love Thanksgiving. They get together with their family. It's so beautiful, which it is. But we have Thanksgiving every Friday night and every Shabbat afternoon. We sit with our family, we sit with our friends, and it's better than Thanksgiving. Not only is the food as delicious and as lavish, but at Thanksgiving, people are checking their phones, people are responding, I gotta go, I have to be somewhere else. Friday night, there's nowhere to go. The car is parked, the keys are put away. We're not allowed to go anywhere. So all we do is sit and enjoy, and nobody's on their phone and nobody's checking messages. It's just quiet, peaceful, beautiful family time to sing and to pray and to eat and to laugh and to say l'chaim and to celebrate life. And this gift of Shabbat is given to us literally right after we left Egypt. So someone asked the question, wasn't the first commandment Rosh Chodesh? And the answer is yes. The first commandment before they left Egypt was Rosh Chodesh. But now that they left Egypt and they split the sea and they're free people, the first instruction they're given is in connection to the manna that came from heaven, not to collect food on Shabbat. They get a double portion on Friday. And the laws of Shabbat are given to them immediately when they leave Egypt, when they're now truly free people. And during the week, we're busy working, being creative with our work. On Shabbat, we do the more important creativity, the creativity that comes from personal growth, of reflection, of thinking, not just doing, but being. And that's what the gift of Shabbat is, right immediately when the Jewish people leave Egypt. Unfortunately, the Jewish people do a lot of complaining, a lot of fetching, as they would say, once they left Egypt. And they complain about the food, they complain about the water, and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to tell you that I mentioned that after the Jews left Egypt, at the very end of the Parsha, they're attacked by Amalek. And I want to just share with you a Rashi. And it's interesting, there's a famous poem that you may have heard of, but I think the source of it is this Rashi, this commentary. The poem is, you may have heard it, about this man who dies and he comes to heaven. And when he comes to heaven, he's shown a movie of his life. Or he looks back as flashback of his life. And he sees that, as he went through life, there were two sets of footprints walking on the beach, his and the second set. And at the most challenging periods of his life, there's only one set of footprints. So he says to God, I don't understand. At the easy times in my life, you walk beside me, but at the most challenging times, you let me walk alone. And God says to him, no, my friend, my son. And those difficult times, the one set of footprints you see is not your footprints, it's my footprints. I was carrying you on my shoulders during those difficult times. Now we come to the Rashi that I think is really the source. When the Jews see Amalek, right before Amalek attacks, the Jews are complaining about the water, lack of water. And they say the following words, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin. They say, is God amongst us or not? And right after that, Amalek comes and attacks the Jewish people. So Rashi asks, why right after the Jews complain about the water, which came out after complaining about the food and lack of meat and everything else, right after they say, is God in our midst or not, Amalek comes and attacks the Jews. So this is what Rashi says. Rashi tells a story about a father who was carrying his son on his shoulders. And he went on the road. And every time the son sitting on the father's shoulders sees an object on the floor, he would ask his father, Daddy, can you get that object for me and give it to me? And the father would bend down, lift up the object, whatever it was, and give it to his son. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. At one point, the son who's sitting on the shoulders of the father sees a man walking towards him. And the son on the shoulders of the father says to the stranger walking down the street, tell me, have you seen my father? And the father says to the son, you don't know where I am? I'm the one who's been giving you all the things you needed and wanted. I'm going to put you down on the floor and you'll walk on your own. He puts the son down and a dog comes and attacks the boy, the son. So this is the analogy Rashi is giving, that God was carrying the Jews on the shoulders, 10 plagues, splitting of the sea, manna from heaven, water from a rock, miracle after miracle after miracle. And then the Jews, like the child on the shoulder of the father, says, is God in our midst? And God says, you could doubt that I'm in your midst of all the miracles you've experienced. I'm going to put you down and you'll be on your own and you'll see where I am. And at that point, the dog, meaning Amalek, comes and attacks the Jewish people. And obviously the lesson that we're being taught here is that sometimes we ourselves, by our actions or our words, sometimes we don't verbalize it, but we doubt in our mind and we say, is God really looking out for me? Is God with me, or am I alone? And God must be thinking, are you kidding me? You're questioning if I'm with you? What about this, and this, and all the things I've done for you? How could you even question if I'm with you? And God forbid, that could lead to negative consequences and repercussions like Amalek coming to attack. And so we should always be grateful. Yes, sometimes we go through challenges, but we should know that in the most challenging moments, it's precisely then that God is carrying us on his shoulders. Now, regarding the incident of the water, how did God resolve the problem of the water? God told Moses to take his staff and strike the rock, and the water will come out. And that's what happened. Moses took the staff, struck the rock, and the water came out. Now, you know that later on, this is the beginning of the 40 years, year one. At the end of the 40 years, there was a similar incident where there was a lack of water in a certain location. And there God told Moses, take the staff and go speak to the rock. And Moses, in his anger, struck the rock. The water came out, but Moses was told, because you struck the rock, when I told you to speak to the rock, you will not enter into the land of Israel. You're no longer fit to be the leader of the Jewish people. And the question is, why in this parsha does God tell Moses to hit the rock? And at the end of the Chumash, he says, speak to the rock. Why in this week's parsha, strike the rock? And at the end of 40 years later, speak to the rock. And so much so that his not speaking to the rock, but striking the rock, led to his disqualification of being the one to lead the Jews into the land of Israel, which was the most passionate desire and request that Moses had, and God rejected it. And the answer, amongst many answers given, is that the difference is the timing. It's the same nation, but this was immediately after they left Egypt, and this is 40 years later, when it's not the former slaves, but it's their children. And the answer is that sometimes, a slave is used to the stick. He's used to being beaten. He's used to power. He's used to strength. And that's the way a slave is compelled to work. And so a nation that just came out of slavery, they don't understand symbolically the idea of speaking to them. You have to hit the rock, and then it produces water. Through force, you achieve your goals. But the nation that was born in freedom, the children who were born in the desert, they were not a nation that you can go with a stick. They are a nation that you have to communicate with. You have to be able to speak to them as a leader and inspire them with your words. And that's why symbolically Moses was told to speak to the rock, not strike the rock. And when he struck the rock, he demonstrated that he still is using the old techniques. He hasn't evolved with the people, and they need a new leader who's qualified to take them into the land of Israel. It's not so much a punishment, but it was a sign that Moses wasn't fit to lead anymore. And again, you could use a lot of analogies about this. One is children, not physically to strike a child, God forbid, but sometimes with a child, you have to punish the child. You tell the child, if you did something wrong, I'm going to punish you. Whatever that punishment may be. When you have a grown-up child, you can't punish them anymore. You could only speak to them and try to inspire them or impress upon them the value and the importance of something. So you have to know who you're dealing with. And the same thing is true in the world. There are certain nations that they don't understand verbal communication, unfortunately. The only thing they understand is strength. A great example would be Iran. You can talk yourself blue in the face. They're not going to back down from their nuclear ambitions just because you speak to them with reason and logic. You have to say, listen, there's consequences. There's going to be repercussions if you don't stop what you're doing. But there are other nations that are good nations that we could talk to them. We could have peaceful dialogue and communication. Like, look what's happening now with the United Arab Emirates and Israel and the new relationships with Morocco and Sudan and Bahrain. Yes, there's people you can talk to and people you can't talk to. Some people you have to go with strength, and some people you could go with communication, with words. And the same thing is true with the Jewish people. There was a generation where, parents can tell their children, this is what we expect you to do as a Jew, and if you don't do it, there's gonna be consequences. Today's generation, today's world is not that way. And there's only one way to get our children to follow the proper Jewish path, and that's through education, through knowledge, through communication, through learning with them, through loving them. And again, it's knowing the right time and the right place for each means of being able to influence others. Just to conclude with the very last section of this week's Torah portion, which is a prediction that is very sad, but unfortunately true. And that is, after the Jews win the war against Amalek, this is what God says. God says, Hashem says to Moses, write this as a remembrance in the book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I shall erase the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Meaning God says, I will always help you defeat Amalek. And then God says, Moses builds an altar, and its name is called Hashem is my miracle, thanking God for the miracle of the victory over Amalek and the promise that God will help the Jews defeat Amalek in every generation. The descendants of Amalek, the Jew haters, the anti-Semites in every generation who will attack the Jews for no reason, like Amalek. Jews didn't do anything to Amalek. He just couldn't stand the existence of the Jews. And then here's the final words. Moses says, when he builds this altar as a thanksgiving to God and says, Hashem is my miracle, he said, for the hand is on the throne of God, meaning Amalek is not just attacking the Jews, he's attacking the throne of God. Why do anti-Semites attack Jews? Everyone says, what do they want from the Jews? What have the Jews done that everyone hates them? And the answer is, it's not attacking the Jews, attacking the throne of God. Evil despises good. God is all good, and evil despises good. So evil attacks the Jews because they're the manifestation, the representation of God in this world, God's people. So therefore, by trying to destroy the Jews, they're waging war against God. This is what it says, that the hand is on the throne of God. Hashem maintains a war against Amalek from generation to generation. We all know the words midor lador, dor v'dor. We always use it in the positive context, passing on our Jewish traditions from dor lador, generation to generation. But here it's used in the negative context, that the war against Amalek will be ongoing from generation to generation. In other words, God is saying to Moses, and Moses is saying to the Jewish people, don't think this was a one-time event in history, that this radical, crazy nation called Amalek 3,300 years ago out of nowhere came with this desire to wipe out the Jewish people. Sadly, this is a prelude, so to speak. It's like a prototype. It's a precedent of what's going to occur in every single generation. There will always be an Amalek whose ambition and goal will be to destroy the Jewish people. And the battle and the courage that the Jews had to show to survive and defeat Amalek will have to be demonstrated by Jews in every generation. Why? You want to know the reason for anti-Semitism? It's a war against the throne of God. But God will stand with the Jews and defeat their enemies, and this miracle will go on in every generation. Midor lador. It's an ongoing battle till the end of time. And sadly, this has been the case. There hasn't been a generation of Jews that have not been spared hatred and anti-Semitism and persecution. But at the same time, Moses' prediction came true, that the miracle of Jewish existence continues despite that in every single generation. And not only the Jews in the time of Amalek, but Jews in every generation, whether it's during the Holocaust or during our state of Israel's existence. Jews have stood up to the enemies, fought them, and defeated them time and again and again and again and again. And no matter how mighty and powerful those other nations were, like Amalek, and how weak and small the Jews were at that given time, just like the Jews left Egypt, were weary and tired from years of slavery, but they miraculously defeated Amalek. We have defeated all the superpowers of the world. And this is nothing less than a miracle. There is no way to explain the hatred of the world against the Jews anti-Semitism. There's no rational explanation for it, except that it's goodness against evil going up against goodness and godliness, because the Jews are God's people and therefore they're waging war against the throne of God. And there's no way to explain the victory of the Jews in every generation, that we prevailed over every single enemy and all these mighty regimes, whether it's Amalek, whether it's the Babylonians, whether it's the Egyptians, whether it's the Romans, whether it's the Syrian Greeks, whether it's the Nazis in last generation, whether it's the mighty Arab nations that have come up against the Jews. Jews have been victorious time and again, because God says they're waging war against my throne. I will stand with you in this battle. You will see the victory. You will see the miracles. And this is a war that will go on from generation to generation. This is sadly one of the unfortunate predictions of the Torah that have been true, and explains anti-Semitism and why sadly it will never end until Mashiach comes, because the Torah says as long as there is evil in the world, evil will always object to God and to godliness and to goodness. And that's the closing verse of this week's Torah portion. And it's interesting that the next Jewish holiday on our calendar, besides tomorrow night being Tu B'Shvat, which is a more minor holiday, but the next rabbinic holiday, of course, is Purim, which will be, God willing, in a month from now. And literally a month from now. We're about 30 days before Purim. And on the morning of Purim, before we read the Megillah, we read this passage about Amalek, because Haman, who tried to destroy the Jews in Persia, was a descendant of Amalek, who again had this desire, this ambition to annihilate the entire Jewish people, very much like Hitler and many other evil people throughout history. But once again, we have another holiday called Purim, and a holiday called Hanukkah, and a holiday called Pesach. The more enemies we've had, the more holidays and the more miracles we've experienced, and the more gratitude and the more we see the hand of God, not only in nature as the splitting of the sea, but in history unfolding each and every generation. So wish everyone a beautiful day. Very important Shabbat, whether you're able to come to shul or not. You definitely want to sing the song of the sea and make it a special Shabbat. If you're able to hear it in the synagogue, great. But if not, just make sure to make it a little bit more joyous this Shabbat. And if you can, put out some bread for the birds before Shabbat, because they sang along and chirped along with us. And wishing everyone a beautiful day and a magnificent week ahead. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see each other soon.